Hey guys, what's going on? It's Louie here, and today I'm going to be reviewing my own personal setup, the Mizutani Super ZLC with Tenergy 05 hard on the forehand and Dignics 05 on the backhand. If you're new here, then definitely make sure to subscribe. Most of my content is focused on coaching, specifically match reviews. All of my coaching is free and anyone can participate. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now, I originally started using this setup because of my coaching sponsorship with Butterfly and basically trying to find something that was as comparable as possible to my previous setup, which was the Yola Energon Super PBO-C. However, the best wins of my career have all come from this setup, so now I can say with full confidence that it is my favorite of everything I've ever played with. I'll try to explain why, while also explaining why this setup is great for me personally, but definitely not ideal for every player. The elephant in the room with this setup is the fact that it is a very stiff blade paired with an extremely hard forehand rubber and a relatively hard backhand rubber. I'm going to try and go shot by shot to be as thorough as possible, starting with the forehand loop. So it's very easy for me, as you can see, to get effortless power with this blade and rubber combination. So when I'm sharp, the ball, the way I describe it, moves on its own. So this clip of me playing is recent. I'm very rusty. But even so, I'm still able to get great power and keep the ball on the table. The loops just feel magnificent and very stable. The Super ZLC gives me a huge sweet spot, so even if I'm not quite hitting the ball in the middle of my blade, I know I can easily predict what the blade is going to do. With the 05 hard, there's definitely spin, but for what it's worth, I would almost certainly be able to get more spin with other rubbers. I have enough spin to spin someone off if I needed to, but it's by no means anything insane. But I still like it because I don't have to deal with the unforgiving nature of tackier rubbers, and my technique just seems to flow much easier with these more standard rubbers. My bread and butter is quick off the bounce loops and lots of deception, especially on the forehand. And the reason I always like ZLC as the carbon in my blades is because it allows me to play extremely quick loops off the bounce pretty effortlessly. And then I go with a rubber like 05 hard because it ensures that if I do want to do something like an inside out forehand or something non-standard, I have 100% confidence in exactly how the ball is going to react off my racket. Basically, if I decide I want to go for a misdirection and can't play the shot with perfect technique, this setup gives me the luxury to do that. Something worth noting is that while you're blocking, this setup will not do any work for you, and it's one reason that I wouldn't recommend this blade for everyone. You have to have pretty good feeling. Even on blocks, there's a pretty large forwards motion you need in order to control the ball, as well as to get any meaningful feedback from the blade. So as you can see here when I'm blocking, I have to kind of push the racket forwards, and that's proper technique, but if I was just learning and I was trying to stick my paddle in the way to block, then all of these shots would be missing. As I'm blocking here, I want to talk a little bit more about my idea behind the setup, basically what I was trying to accomplish and why it works for me. And basically my thinking is that I'm trying to get the best of both worlds as it relates to the slower, spinnier shots and the quicker, snappier shots. So for example, if I serve underspin and get a super uncomfortable push back, the fact that I'm using Tenergy and not something like Hurricane or 09C means that I can just throw the ball up with spin and it'll have pretty high quality. But let's say I do want to rip it with power, the rubber and blade combo is so stiff that this shot also has good quality. Another example is the counter. If someone loops to me, the stiff blade and rubber means I can counter rip off the bounce and it'll have pretty high quality, but I can also go back and play the more army, slow, away from the table counter if I want to. One drawback is that I don't get quite as much spin as I could with other setups, and there's very little dwell time with this blade. Basically, the ball is off of the racket as soon as it was on it, and it goes without saying, but this setup requires extremely good feeling, otherwise all your pushes, serves, and short touches are just going to outright miss. So basically, I'm opting for a safety net on the loops, so more forgiving loops with less forgiving touches, as opposed to a tackier rubber where you may have less forgiving loops but much more forgiving touches. When it comes to the backhand, I go with Dignics 05 instead of Tenergy 05 hard because extra dwell time is necessary on modern backhand shots, and 05 hard just doesn't have that dwell time. For example, to illustrate this, Everyone loves to play forehand flip kills, but how often do you see backhand flip kills? You don't. You see banana flips, chiquitas, strawberry flips, and even faster backhand flips are way spinnier than their forehand counterparts. However, the rubber Dignics 05 is hard enough to where I can rip it if I want to. It took me a very long time to develop a proper backhand, as forehand always just came more naturally to me. However, now I'd almost consider myself a backhand player, and yet I would say because the backhand naturally has a smaller range of motion, the low dwell time, even going for a softer rubber like Dignics 05, means most backhand shots are exceptionally unforgiving. It's very easy to have a small mistiming, and the ball will just miss by a foot long or go straight into the net. But the quality when everything connects like it should is phenomenal. So again, it comes down to the fact, and I guess it's worth mentioning, that this is a setup that requires very good feeling, and especially on the backhand side, requires almost perfect technique on every shot. I think regular Tenergy 05, not 05 hard, would be a little more forgiving than Dignics on the backhand due to the higher throw angle, but for me it would lower the quality too much when trying to rip or when playing the quick backhand to backhand rallies against right-handed players. Remember how I mentioned forgiving shots? One area this setup absolutely excels in is playing against pips, which is what you're seeing on the screen now. Looping into long pips, whether it's against a block or a proper chop, if I want to literally swing with all arm and feeling with no body whatsoever, I can do that safely with this setup, which is something that I wouldn't be able to do with almost any other setup. For example, with tacky rubbers, it wouldn't be possible due to the throw angle, and if I were to switch to a slower or softer setup, I'd need way too much force, so again it wouldn't be possible. But as you can see, these loops against chop are very stable, but I really don't need to exert too much force. Alright, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the weight of the paddle. This is a heavier setup. When everything is glued up and put together, it's very hard for me to stay under 190 grams. That's just what happens when you play with harder and thicker rubbers. I wouldn't be surprised if some people using this setup, especially if you boost or use multiple layers of glue, end up well over 200 grams. So, what does that mean? It means that it's very, again, important to have very good technique. And the reason I say that as it relates to the weight of the paddle is you can't afford to drop the paddle under the table. You have to be able to keep the paddle up to keep your shots nice and snappy and keep your recovery time quick. And it's very easy with a setup like this to fall into those habits or start making a semicircle with your shot instead of playing with a direct motion.
Alright, and as I'm counter looping away from the table here, I want to reiterate one more time the reason this works for me is because it really feels like I'm getting the best of both worlds in regard to the safeness of the shots and the quality that I can generate. If I went with something tackier, like 09C or Hurricane, the throw angle would be too low and the shots would be too unforgiving. If I went with something softer, like a softer rubber or just a softer blade, then I'd have to exert way more force away from the table just to generate this sort of quality. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that other setups are bad. There are tons of pro players that use different setups, but with my specific shots and my specific technique, that's the reason that this setup works so well for me. But anyway, that's going to do it for this review. As you take a look at a couple of my serves, you can see that I'm still getting plenty of spin on the serves, and I'm going to have a couple of highlights for my very, very rusty match. So again, apologies for the lack of super long, exciting rallies. A lot of this was just serve, return, and attack, because again, I'm so rusty. But again, that's kind of the overview of my setup. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give a big thumbs up, leave a comment. It helps the algorithm, it helps me so much. And if you're interested in free coaching, then make sure to join my Discord server. There's a video with instructions on what you can do. But enjoy the match highlights as I end the video. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next video.